everybody, and welcome to a very special top 5 board game video about tabletop RPGs. Before I get started, if you haven't done so already, please take a look at all my various social media pages as well as my Patreon page. On all those, you'll be able to interact with myself and my channel in all sorts of fun and unique ways. Moving right into the video for today though, tabletop RPGs. This is how I really got into hobby gaming initially back, almost 2 decades ago now. And I really wanted to talk about it because they have such different varieties of these types of games, and the thing is, it's far more subjective, at least in my opinion, when it comes to judging the tabletop RPGs, and everybody has such different experiences because it's not simply based off of game mechanics like board games can be or something along those lines, but you have very distinct entities to the game. You have the players, you have the GM, the game master, dungeon master, whatever it's referred to as, and then you have the game mechanics as sort of the rules of the world, and then everybody else just lives in it type of thing. So as always, I'm particularly curious what you guys have to say about this. A few weeks ago I did a video where I talked about tabletop games that transitioned well into a board game style, and I just want to know, do you guys play tabletop RPGs? If so, what are your personal favorites and why? Like I said, for me, this is a very, very subjective thing, and I'm going to be judging it mostly thematically in this particular case, but again, I'm curious what you guys think and what you guys personally judge all of this stuff on. That said, we're going to get started with my number 5. At number 5, I've got the Call of Cthulhu. As its name implies, it's based off of the Lovecraftian mythos, same as Arkham Horror, Eldritch Horror, Elder Sign, some of these other really popular board games. But that said, the tabletop RPG is really unique, at least what I've found, in its theme, because it's taking place in, typically at least, the 1920s-ish, so you're talking about like speakeasies, the Roaring Twenties, the Depression, and it's a very investigative style of RPG, at least if you play through as intended. And I was lucky enough that I had a pretty decent group, so we had a really good time, and the GM that we had was really good about keeping the atmosphere up, which is what I really enjoyed about this game. Mechanically, it wasn't that great, and that's why it's so low on this list. There are games that have better and smoother mechanics that I'll talk about in just a little bit, but overall, Call of Cthulhu, it's really fun, very engrossing atmosphere, and honestly one of my favorite horror groups of books and stories and things, so that is why it is my number 5. At number 4, I've got Shadowrun. Shadowrun, very similarly to Call of Cthulhu, is one that really speaks volumes to me in the theme. I love cyberpunk, and I love this sort of Blade Runner style, like augmentation, Deus Ex, and those types of things where you have body modifications to make yourself better at hacking, and you've got all of the very unique sort of integration of like Japanese culture, where you essentially have the equivalent of the Yakuza, and you have people that, or groups of players that are literally called street samurai and things of that nature. So the theming for this is really on point for me. It has a lot of aspects that I really love. That said, I found it really difficult to get a good group together, and honestly, more often than not, I just play Shadowrun Returns, which is the Steam version of the Shadowrun games. And I also, somewhere around here, right there at least, I have Shadowrun Crossfire, which is one of the games that I talked about in my earlier video about the transition of tabletop to board games. So it's one of those things where I know it's wonderful, and I've done some play-by-posts and things like that, but it just doesn't feel the same as being at the table. Mechanically, it's great, and I've played the second edition a little bit, which relatively recently came out, and I think it works a lot more smoothly compared to the older editions. But that said, Shadowrun, it's a very fun, very cyberpunk, so if you really enjoy that type of thing, then it can really be a great ticket for you, and that is why it is my number 4. At number 3, I've got the granddaddy of them all, Dungeons & Dragons. This may come as a surprise to you guys that it's not number 1 or number 2 or just like straight up higher on the list or something along those lines, but the fact is that I have played enough D&D to know the bad aspects of D&D, and I know the things that I really don't like. The thing is that these books right here, these are from 5th edition, and I've played 4th, I played 2.5, and I've played 3.5 and a little bit of 2. So I've played a lot of different editions. fourth the most, and the thing is, I just really didn't like fourth. It was not fun, and the thing is, that's what the D&D board games are based off of. I don't know if they're right behind me, but they might be. I can never remember where I alphabetize things, but either way, the D&D tabletop game, just like with any of these, is really related to how good your dungeon master is and how involved the players are getting. And the problem is that D&D doesn't really give you. It gives you a good framework in which to do it, but it doesn't force one way or the other. And so that can create a lot of tension amongst players, and that's why this is a little bit lower on the list, because you'll have people who are there just for the combat, you'll have people who are just there wanting loot, you'll have people who are just there wanting to be more social and do like the dialogue scenes and stuff like that. And that's kind of the issue that I've run into time and time and time again. It's great that you have a versatile system that's capable of doing that, but the problem is, if you end up with a group, chances are you're going to have multiple people who want to do different things. And it's really up to the DM to balance that as best as they can. And sometimes it hits the mark and sometimes it doesn't. So just because of the inconsistency, it's a little bit lower on this list. But that said, 5th edition, definitely my favorite. I have absolutely loved this. These are the main 3 core books. And then I've also got a bunch of the adventure books as well. So I am like teaming with D&D 5th. I do enjoy it, but there are some improvements that could be made, and mostly by planning on the part of the players and the DM. But either way, D&D is my number 3. At number 2, I've got Star Wars, Edge of the Empire / Age of Rebellion / Force and Destiny, essentially the Fantasy Flight version of the Star Wars tabletop RPG. I think they did a wonderful job with this. This right here, this is the core book for Edge of the Empire, the first release of this particular series. And the nice thing about this over something like Dungeons and Dragons is that D&D is your generalized fantasy thing. And the D20 system that D&D uses has been reutilized for all sorts of stuff, including Munchkin, and there's one thing called Gamma World, which is actually kind of fun, and a whole bunch of different things. But Star Wars Edge of the Empire is Star Wars. Like, if you are a Star Wars fan, this is the game to play. I love the mechanics of this game. It uses a very unique dice system in order to determine whether or not you succeed or fail at a particular task. And I think it's really neat because it greatly encourages, not improvisation, but it encourages theatrics. And that's one of the things that I really enjoy with tabletop RPGs. Whether you're in combat and you describe some cool dodge and hacky slash move that you're doing, or whether you're in a dialogue scene and you actually say what your character says, and so your GM is just like, oh yeah, you succeed automatically, stuff like that. Again, it does boil down to the people you're playing with, but the nice thing is that if you're playing a Star Wars RPG, chances are greater than most that the people playing know Star Wars, and they're at least familiar with it. The biggest issue that I have with this particular game is how everything gets split up. One thing with Star Wars is obviously everybody wants to be a Jedi, and Force and Destiny, one of the other core books, was the first time that Fantasy Flight really introduced good rules relating to how to do Force sensitive and all that kind of stuff. There is a little bit in this one, but it kind of sucks, honestly, and so that's why it's a little bit lower on this list. But either way, Star Wars, Edge of the Empire, Age of Rebellion, Force and Destiny, my number 2. At number 1, I've got 7th Sea. This is one that you guys may or may not be familiar with. It's a little bit more under the radar than the other ones that I've talked about. Here I've got the 2nd edition. This is what I backed off of Kickstarter to get it. And the fact is that the mechanics on this really speak to me as a tabletop gamer. And this is one where everybody in the game is highly encouraged to really be in character and be what's referred to as an actor in the D&D books. That is to say, you have all of the theatrics, and in this case you actually get boons for being properly theatrical. And like, it's really incredible. You get what are called drama dice, and you actually have a stat called panache, or panache, however you want to pronounce it. And it's really, really incredible, not to mention that you have a lot lot of different, I mean, just like with anything, you have different races of people and they all have their own culture and everything. And I kind of like it just because the different cultures are based primarily off of like European and then East Asian and Middle Eastern countries. And so you can always recognize where the culture comes from and things like that. You do have that to a good bit with the Star Wars and with D&D especially, but with 7th Sea it's kind of nice to see a very plain and pure real-world equivalent to what you're seeing in the game. And that's one reason why I really enjoy it. But again, the actual role-playing aspect and the amazing joy that I get for sitting around and just seeing everybody describe all of these amazing actions and things is absolutely incredible. And that's why by far 7th Sea is my #1 tabletop RPG. Well, folks, that's it for me. I hope that you enjoyed this video on my top 5 favorite tabletop RPGs. I know it's a little bit of a departure from the norm, but I'm especially curious to hear what you guys have to say about it. I know I always say that, but in this case, like, I really am, because like I mentioned before, these games are very unique in that they have an extra sort of piece to the puzzle where you've got the game master. You have somebody who's in charge of running the game. Granted, you have that in some things like Descent and to an extent Imperial Assault and some of these other games, but at the same time, the DM, the GM, whatever they're referred to as, is absolutely integral and key to the entire experience for everybody playing the game. If you get a bad DM, then you can have a horrible experience. If you get a good DM, then you can have a great experience even if the game mechanics are not that ideal. And I've had both of those. But that said, like I mentioned, my personal top 5 mostly based off of the theme and how the mechanics mix in with that and sort of commingle together and what the games individually encourage. But as always, I'm really curious what you guys have to say. Are you tabletop RPGers? Do you enjoy it? Why do you not? All that kind of stuff. For me personally, it's unfortunate because I haven't been able to play these games in quite a while. I'm really anxious to get started back up. So if anybody wants to play by post, hit me up and I will be happy to start up something. But that said, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.